In common with other programming languages, PHP uses the term string to refer to text. Strings need to be enclosed in quotes, and you can use either single or double quotes, but there is an important difference in how they work. So let's explore that difference. We'll also take a look at what are known as escape sequences in PHP strings. I'm going to begin by creating a variable to store the title of one of my favorite books. And I'm going to use single quotes, and the editing program that I'm using automatically inserts the closing quote, and it puts the cursor between the two quotes ready for me to start typing. So the book is called The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and as soon as I type that apostrophe S, the closing quote disappears in my editing program, and my editing program brings up code hints, thinking that I'm going to be doing something else. I'm going to ignore that for the moment and just carry on with the string. So Guide to the Galaxy, and then my closing quote, and my editing program thinks there's something wrong here. It's giving me two quotes. I don't need that second one. Get rid of it and then put in the semicolon. And I've got wavy red lines underneath all of this text here. And that's one of the real advantages of using an editing program that checks your syntax as you're typing. So the problem here is that quotes must be in matching pairs, and PHP sees this apostrophe in hitchhikers as the matching closing single quote. So all of the rest of the string is regarded as garbage. One way to deal with this situation is to insert a backslash in front of the apostrophe. So if I put my insertion point there and put in a backslash, those wavy red lines disappear. The syntax error has been corrected. This is what is known as an escape sequence. The backslash tells the PHP engine to treat the following character as part of the string. So we can now test this. Let's just use echo and then book. Save that and load the page into the browser, and it displays Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy with that apostrophe in there. Now, I think that this looks rather ugly. It makes it difficult to read if you've got backslashes there. So there's another way around this, and that's to use a double quoted string. So let's just duplicate that line, and then I'll comment out the previous line. Get rid of that backslash, and then change the opening quote to a double quote, and the closing one also to a double quote. No syntax errors there. Let's save that page, refresh the browser, and it's still working. And I think this is much more elegant. It makes it a lot easier to read. So mixing and matching your quotes, if you've got single or double quotes inside of a string, makes your code a lot easier to maintain. But what if I wanted to display Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy in quotes? Well, that's done easily enough. Let's just duplicate that line, and we'll comment out the previous line. What we do is we put this into single quotes, so we can have our double quotes inside our single quotes. And let's put a single quote at the end. My editing program has given me an extra one. Let's just get rid of that. And of course, we've now got this syntax error again because the opening single quote here is matching the apostrophe in the middle here. So we do need to escape it this time. Do that. The syntax error goes away. Save and refresh the browser. We've now got Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy being displayed inside double quotes. You've probably got the message by now that if you want to use double quotes inside a double quoted string, then you need to use a backslash in front of those double quotes. So let's just try that. Duplicate this line again, comment out the previous one, and we're going to change this to a double quote. And I've got an extra one in there, which I don't want. Let's get rid of that. We need a backslash. We don't need this backslash here, but we need a backslash in front of that double quote there, and then right at the very end, we need another double quote, and everything looks fine. Just save that, refresh the browser, and it is still working. But I think that having more backslashes than you really need in a string looks rather ugly. It makes it difficult to read, and being difficult to read makes it difficult to maintain. So I think the best way of handling this particular situation was the previous one, to have single quotes, the double quotes inside there, and the backslash in front of the apostrophe. But what if I want to incorporate this variable into a string? Well, let's try that out with single quotes. I'm going to comment out that, and then at the end of the line I'll have echo and then single quotes, I love book. Don't forget that semicolon at the end. Save that and refresh the page in the browser, and it displays I love $book. And this is the vital difference between single and double quotes. Anything enclosed in single quotes is treated as literal text, so you don't get the value of the variable, you get the variable itself. So let's see what happens if we change this to double quotes. So let's just comment out the previous one, and then we'll change the single quote there to a double quote, and the same at the end of our string. Save that and refresh the page in the browser. This time the value of book is displayed in the string. So if you ever want to incorporate a variable in a string, you need to use double quotes. The double quotes act as a signal to the PHP engine to process any variables which are inside the string. But double quotes process not only variables, they also process special escape sequences. These are the most common escape sequences that are used within double quotes in PHP. Later in this course you'll use new line and carriage return escape sequences when building scripts for email. The important thing to remember about escape sequences is that the only one that works in single quoted strings is backslash apostrophe or backslash single quote. All other escape sequences must be in double quotes. If you try to use them in single quotes, the backslash is treated as literal text. Double quotes process variables and escape sequences, so why not use double quotes all the time? Surely they're better. Well, not necessarily. Most coding standards for big projects such as WordPress recommend using single quotes for literal text, but this isn't a hard and fixed rule. The main consideration should be to reduce the use of backslashes. If you're creating a string that contains quotes or apostrophes, choose whichever combination uses the fewest backslashes. It'll make your code easier to read and maintain. When working with variables that contain strings or numbers, there's often a need to join their values to create a new string, either to display directly on screen or to store in another variable. This is particularly important when using PHP to send an email message. There are several ways to build strings from variables, and to demonstrate that I've opened this file, join_strings.php, which you can find in the chapter 2 02_06 folder of the exercise files. The basic method to build a string from other values is to use the concatenation operator. Concatenation is just a fancy technical term that means to link in a chain or series. In many programming languages, the plus sign is used as the concatenation operator, but PHP is the odd one out. It uses a dot or period. So let's use the concatenation operator to join the values of first name and last name together in a new variable, in a new string called full name. So we'll have first name, then the concatenation operator, a dot or period, and then last name. I've added a space on either side of the concatenation operator for readability. It's small, so it can be difficult to see. Having the space on either side makes your code easier to maintain. So we've added those together now. That's a new string, full name. So echo full name. We'll save that and load the page into the browser. And full name is displayed there, but there is no space between David and Powers, no space between first name and last name. Adding that space on either side of the concatenation operator doesn't make any difference. That's white space that is ignored by PHP. If you want to have a space in there, you need to add a literal space. So let's just duplicate that line and comment out the previous one. And we need to put in a literal string consisting of a single space and then another concatenation operator. If we save that and refresh the page in the browser, we've now got the space between those two values. But quite frankly, that's not the most efficient way to put a space between variables. A better way would be to use a double quoted string. So let's create a double quoted string for title and author. We'll save that as book, and double quotes, then title, a space, some literal text, by, and then author, our other variable. And I'm going to add the concatenation operator in here and put in an HTML BR tag, and then we will echo the value of book. So if we save that and refresh the browser, there is the value of title, the literal text by, and then the value of author. They've all been processed by PHP because they're in a double quoted string. So the more efficient way of getting that space in full name would have been to use a double quoted string. So let's just quickly do that. We'll duplicate that line, comment out the previous one, and then we'll have a double quoted string. We can get rid of the concatenation operator and the literal space there, and we just need to have double quote at the end. We've got a space between the two. If we save that and refresh, we still get that space between David and Powers. When sending an email with PHP, the body of the message needs to be a single string, and often this information comes from many different fields in an online form, so a convenient way to merge them into a single string is with what's known as the combined concatenation operator. This consists of a period or dot immediately followed by an equals sign. What it does is it adds the new string to the end of the existing one. So let's create an email message. I'm just going to comment out these two lines here, and then we'll create our new variable called message, and we'll start off with the ordinary assignment operator, and then a double quoted string. We'll have name, and then we'll use our full name, and we want to have some new lines in between. So here on line 7 is a variable called new lines. It uses the escape sequence for a carriage return, new line character, carriage return, new line character. And we could add it directly at the end of full name without any space in between, because the $sign indicates that it's a new variable. But I think it probably makes it more easy to read your code if you put a little space in there, and then we'll have new lines. So that is the first line of our message. Then we want to add something to the end of the message. So it will be message, and then the combined concatenation operator, so a dot or period followed immediately by the equals sign, and then another double quoted string. We'll have literal text book, colon, followed by our variable book, and then our new lines, and then we'll add something else to our message. So we need the combined concatenation operator again, and then double quoted string, answer, and we'll have our variable answer. And so if we then echo message, save that, and refresh the page in a browser, it then displays name, David Powers, book by Douglas Adams, answer 42. Everything has been added together by using the combined concatenation operator here on the next lines. We don't actually see the new lines in here. That's because browsers don't display carriage returns and new line characters. But if we right click and view the page source, we can see that those new lines have been added in. Technically speaking, a string can be as large as up to 2 gigabytes, but don't go mad. Some beginners think that everything in a PHP page needs to be stored in variables and displayed using echo. That's not true. PHP is designed to be embedded in HTML, so only those parts that change need to be stored as variables. So I'm going to open this file here, embedded.php, which you can also find in the exercise files for this video. At the top of the page are several variables that have been hard-coded. Normally they would come from an external source such as a database. And then down here in the HTML part of the page, I've used PHP blocks and echo to display those variables. Book is being displayed here, then there's another PHP block down here to display author, and then down at the bottom, yet another PHP block to display answer. When you're displaying just a single string, you can use a shorthand for echo. So instead of having echo here and the full opening PHP tag, I can delete echo and PHP and just replace that PHP with an equals sign. This is a very useful shorthand, but it only works when you're displaying a single string. You can't combine other PHP operations in the same PHP block. So if I just save that quickly, we can see that this will work exactly the same as using echo here. If we load the page into a browser, everything that is highlighted, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Douglas Adams and 42, they're coming from dynamic sources. They're coming from the PHP. Everything else that's not highlighted is static HTML. So when you need to join strings, use the concatenation operator, which is a dot or period. You can also use double quotes to combine the value of variables with literal text. And the combined concatenation operator, a dot immediately followed by an equals sign, lets you add more text to an existing variable. But when there's a lot of static text, don't forget that PHP can be embedded in HTML. And to display a single string, you can use the shorthand for echo, which consists of a less than symbol and a question mark, immediately followed by an equals sign. Sometimes you need to construct a string that contains a lot of quotation marks, for example when building an SQL query to submit to a database. The need to escape nested quotes means the string can quickly become messy, hard to read, and equally hard to maintain. I've got an example here in this file, escape.php, which you can find in the chapter 2 02_07 folder of the exercise files. On lines 3 to 6, we define several variables. Then on line 8 is a double quoted string that uses those variables, but it's also got nested inside it 3 pairs of double quotes. And because we're inside a double quoted string, we need to escape each of those double quotes inside this string. And I think that makes it rather ugly. It also makes it difficult to read. To avoid this problem, you can build the string an alternative way using what's known as heredoc syntax. So let's switch to this other file, heredoc.php, which is also in the exercise files for this video, and lines 3 to 6 define the same variables, so we can now start building a string using heredoc syntax. You can call the variable anything you like. I'm simply going to use heredoc. Then after the assignment operator, you need to add 3 less than symbols, and that needs to be followed by an identifier that will be used to mark the end of the string. The identifier can be any combination of alphanumeric characters, but it can't begin with a number. You can also use an underscore. It's common practice to use all uppercase, but that's not required. I'm going to use EOT, which stands for end of text. Now my editing program seems to think I'm looking for something else, so I just need to click alongside that to get rid of that code hint. And immediately after my identifier, I need to press return or enter, and my editing program has automatically inserted that identifier followed by a semicolon. If your editing program doesn't put this in automatically, you'll need to type it in yourself. But between the opening identifier and the closing identifier, I can now start typing my string, and I don't have to worry about quotes at all. I can use double quotes, single quotes, and variables, and they will all be interpreted correctly by PHP. So in, and then we'll have some double quotes. Inside there we'll put our variable, title, and another variable there, the author. Yet another variable, our Android. Some more double quotes. And notice that as I'm typing, I'm not getting any syntax errors shown to me by my editing program. My editing program uses red wavy lines to indicate syntax errors, and there are no errors at all. So let's continue. So I've used double quotes, I've used variables, I've also used apostrophes or single quotes in there, and everything looks fine as far as my editing program is concerned. It's not complained at all about syntax errors. So after the closing identifier, let's echo our variable, which I've called HereDoc, save that, and then load the page into a browser. And that string is displayed perfectly. PHP has processed all of the variables, and it's also preserved the double quotes and the apostrophes or single quotes that I've put in there. So this can be very useful for building complex strings without having to worry about escaping quotes. But there is something that you need to be very careful about. Let's go back into the editing program. There must be nothing on this line after the opening identifier. If I click in there and add a space, immediately my editing program alerts me to lots of problems. Let's just save that and refresh the browser. And indeed, we've got a syntax error. There's unexpected two less than symbols. So let's get rid of that extra space there, and the syntax error goes away. You also need to be extremely careful with the ending identifier. There must be absolutely nothing else on the line apart from the identifier and the semicolon. If I add a space in there, immediately this turns to a different color. I've got a wavy line down here saying that I've got a syntax error, and if I save that and refresh, indeed I still do have a syntax error, unexpected end of file. There must be no space, nothing else on the line after that, and indeed there must be nothing else at the beginning of the line. We get the same problem if you put some space in there at the beginning of the line that has got that closing identifier. This is one of the very few cases where white space is not ignored by PHP. You mustn't have any white space around the closing identifier and the semicolon, and there must be no white space or anything else on the line after the opening identifier. Apart from that, HereDoc syntax is extremely easy to use. You don't use it very often because it's rare to have to build long strings that contain a mixture of literal text, quotes, and variables, but it can be useful for building SQL queries for submission to a database.